Crown Tundra is the final expansion pass installment for Pokemon Sword and Shield, and it's the best part about the games, hands down, no questions asked. Granted, the bar wasn't particularly high to begin with. The biggest strength that Crown Tundra has to offer is the near lack of linearity that has been plaguing the franchise as a whole for years now. Don't get me wrong, linearity isn't inherently a bad thing, when done right. Games that really benefit from being linear have a concise focus on narrative consistency and integrity, with compelling characters to help move things along. Pokemon typically has neither of these two things, which turns the linear game design into a slog that feels horrible to play. Consistently refuse to give the player the option to skip all cutscenes, and you have a recipe for disaster that is the rotten bedrock of base Sword and Shield, and by extension, the Isle of Armor. Crown Tundra 2 starts off rather linear, before eventually giving the player the reins to do as they please. When the player first arrives to the Crown Tundra, two new characters, Peony and his daughter, Peonia, happen by chance to cross paths with you. Peonia has a bit of a falling out with her father, accusing him of being too clingy. Peony is only interested in spending quality time with his daughter, which seems to be the only reason he brought her out to the Crown Tundra, but she isn't interested. Her sole motivation for the entirety of the Crown Tundra is to go on Dynamax adventures within the Max Lair, one of the new features that we will get to in a second. She enlists the player to help her get her dad off her back. You aren't given a choice and proceed to engage in a battle with Peony, where he admits he used to be a gym leader, which is interesting. The lack of level scaling has been carried over from the Isle of Armor, unfortunately, so if you use higher level Pokemon, you will be able to crush any adversaries with extreme ease. After the fight, Nia is nowhere to be found, capitalizing on the player's distraction to head to the Max Lair cave. Once you get there, you learn she journeyed deeper into the cave, so you team up with Peony to track her down. The scientist in charge of the facility mentions, in passing, how Peony looks like Chairman Rose, which is foreshadowing the fact that Peony is indeed Rose's brother, as I predicted, but we'll get to that when the time comes. The Max Lair, one of the key new additions featured in the Crown Tundra, is essentially max raid battles with a bunch of extra steps. Max Lair is unfortunately not free roam as initially assumed, but instead adopts a game board style play similar to World of Light in Smash Ultimate. Yourself, along with 3 others, go up against a gauntlet of Dynamax Pokemon in the hopes to reach the random legendary boss at the end of the tunnel, which is a fun surprise each time. If more than 4 Pokemon faint at any given moment throughout the entirety of the run, you lose and must start back at the beginning. A neat limitation that prevents you from steamrolling over any given Max Lair challenge is that you are forced to use rental Pokemon. This promotes both strategy and increased diversity that actively prevents you from abusing powerful Pokemon to muscle your way through any obstacles. As a group, you select the preferred path while inching your way towards the end. On your path, you can come across trainers to trade up Pokemon, or berries to slightly heal your team. You can also catch and swap any Dynamax Pokemon you run into that can be used to strengthen a type matchup for future battles, or used as a fresh bill of health if your current Pokemon is severely weakened. One other thing that makes the Max Lair more enjoyable than Max Raids are the removal of the obnoxious shields that some Dynamax Pokemon have access to, which slows the battle down to an agonizing crawl. If you're a fan of Dynamax, then you are most definitely in for a treat, as the Max Lair is a huge step up from traditional Max Raid battles. But if you don't enjoy Dynamax at all, such as myself, then there's little offered here that will appeal to you. The raid style fights are still incredibly slow and tedious, even with the removal of the shields, and I found myself just spamming my strongest attack until I made it to the end. Once at the end, if you successfully capture the random legendary boss, you then get to choose one Pokemon that you caught along the way to keep, which will typically be the legendary. There's an insane boost to shiny odds in the Max Lair, which is an additional incentive to both shiny hunters and regular trainers alike to jump back into the Max Lair time and time again. After you complete your first run, the player bumps into Nia while in the cave. She confesses that her dad's plans to spend time with her are hella lame, and she'd rather partake in more Dynamax Pokemon battles. So she asks you to take her place by going on an adventure with her dad in her stead, which defeats the entire purpose of Peony going on the trip in the first place. Peony and Nia's strained father-daughter relationship is such a bizarre way to introduce both these characters and the story. Throwing the player into the middle of it all is awkward and confusing. Nia just comes across as a selfish, spoiled brat that doesn't take her father's feelings into consideration, and Peony comes across as a weak, submissive old man lacking authority as a father. Anyways, you decide to go along with Nia's plan and you both go your separate ways. That's actually the last time you interact with or see Nia at all during the rest of the campaign, which is an incredible waste of potential just discarding her entire character in such a way. You catch up with Peony after he somehow hit his head from a fall despite wearing a helmet, and he surprisingly agrees to go on a father-daughter adventure with some random kid he met only moments ago, conceding that he can't force Nia to do what she doesn't want to do, despite being able to convince her to join him on their trip. The sensible thing for Peony to do would be to join his daughter and entertain what she's interested in doing, if he really wanted to spend time with her. But he instead chooses to abandon his daughter altogether, which directly contradicts his own personal motivations and desires. Peony wants you to investigate rumors involving legendaries that are scattered throughout the tundra. He gives you 3 clues that focus on the 3 main objectives of the Crown Tundra. The first clue is the main overarching narrative that focuses on the King of Bountiful Harvest. The second is about the Regis, and the third is the legendary birds. There were much better and smarter ways to execute the exhibition-style narrative that didn't involve messy and ultimately pointless family drama that amounts to nothing in the end. Peony or Nia could be replaced by anyone and nothing changes. For example, having the player character sign up with an exhibition crew is one way they could have gone about it. Narrative shortcomings aside, let's jump into the gameplay. This is where the Crown Tundra opens up and truly shines. You can tackle any of these clues in any order at your own discretion, which was extremely refreshing in a game where your hand is held painfully tight, preventing you from diverging from the path forced upon you. The Crown Tundra is absolutely massive, even compared to the Isle of Armor, which was quite sizable. It's so large in fact that I often found myself getting lost. This was especially the case when visibility was compromised, like during a snowstorm. Sword and Shield's navigation systems do not scale up well at all, and are unable to properly account for the increase in explorable area. As a result, your map is effectively useless in helping guide you to the many locations necessary to complete your tasks. Getting lost is a good sign. That means there's a lot of ground to cover. But getting lost with no way to properly navigate can be frustrating. The map shows the vague, general area that you are in, but unlike modern video game maps of the past 2 decades, it doesn't update with your exact location in the game world. This means I could be in an entirely different location than what was reflected on the map, and I would have no way of knowing otherwise. There's also no compass, which makes orienting yourself equally as challenging. I often found myself wandering aimlessly in the hopes that I came across what I was looking for. While large relative to the rest of the game, the Crown Tundra is not mega-sized by any means, so after a bit of play you are able to map out the area by memory to a reliable enough degree that somewhat offsets the gross incompetence of the navigational tools at your disposal. I cannot emphasize enough how great it is to grant agency to the player. Being able to jump off the tracks and tackle the game in your own way creates varying experiences that are unique to each individual. I'll start off with the Regi clue, as that was the most simplistic of the 3. In order to gain access to the temple that houses the 2 new Regis, Regivolt and Regidrago, you first need to get your hands on the original trio consisting of Regis, Regirock, and Registeel. In order to do that, you needed to solve a unique riddle for each to gain access to their respective temples. 2 of them were trivial, while Registeel was a bit trickier. I appreciate the mini puzzles nonetheless, as it makes obtaining the Regis feel more earned and worthwhile. Once you have the 3 Regis, you can enter the final 4th temple, where you must activate panels on the ground to match one of the 2 patterns that can be seen outside of the temple that coincide with both Regivolt and Regidrago respectively. This grants you access to only one of the new Regis. The only way to get the other at the moment is by trading someone for theirs. The next clue revolving around the new Galarian birds was a fun one as well. It starts off with one of the most soulful and well executed cutscenes in the entire game that has the 3 birds face off in a fierce confrontation until interrupted by the player's Rotom phone. You then need to venture to different parts of Galar to chase down the birds in classic roaming Pokemon fashion. In order to even initiate an encounter with Articuno, you first need to follow it until cornered. Then, you need to overcome a mini-game where Articuno creates false copies of itself, and you need to choose the real Articuno to initiate the battle. Zapdos is found in the original wild area, where you literally need to run it down until you make contact. Moltres is found flying around the Isle of Armor at an even greater speed than Zapdos, forcing you to outmaneuver it if you want a shot at battling it. It was a brilliant idea to not only reintroduce roaming Pokemon, but to incorporate both the base game and the Isle of Armor that neatly ties everything together in an organic and harmonizing way. The last clue in the main overarching narrative of the entire expansion focused around Calyrex, and it was arguably the weakest of the 3, surprisingly. The vast majority of it is growing a single carrot to attract Calyrex's horse, and that's essentially it. No fun little puzzle, it just requires you to press the A button a lot, treats you to half of the black screens featured throughout the entire game to avoid animating at all cost, and then it ends abruptly. You are also given a Master Ball by Peony after he hands you the 3 clues, so even the battle with Calyrex after he fuses with his horse is incredibly anticlimactic if you choose to use it. And after Calyrex is caught, it's never really brought back up again, which struck me as odd. The 3 stories are self-contained and don't connect in any way. It would have been cool if maybe the 3 birds were originally outlooks for Calyrex the king, and the Regis were his noble knights. But the Regis and the birds are just sort of there, and Calyrex is forgotten the second he enters your ball. It was incredibly underwhelming through and through, and the only way to get the other horse, similar to the other Regi, is to trade someone for their own, which may be tricky considering that these are new legendary Pokemon. Calyrex mind-controlling Peony as a means of communication was an amusing approach, and I would love to see more Pokemon on human interaction as it's a great way to bring the world of Pokemon to life. Having them there is one thing, but having them actively engage with their surroundings, including other Pokemon and people, would do wonders for the series. This is why I love Nebby from Pokemon Sun and Moon. It was the perfect way to incorporate the box legend into the story that didn't just have it as some kind of prize to be claimed at the end, where they are almost entirely removed from the story as mere enigmas, sometimes vaguely and arbitrarily referred to in passing. The best part about Pokemon are the Pokemon themselves. So including them in the story in more direct and meaningful ways is definitely a trend that I would like to see continued in future installments. One of the major downsides of the Crown Tundra is that it didn't really expand upon the world building aspect of the Galar region in any significant way. One key example is Peony, a sorely missed opportunity. I predicted correctly that Peony was in fact Rose's brother, and was hoping that Peony would give us additional insight concerning Rose. Did Peony flesh out Rose in new and exciting ways that explored Rose as a powerful, yet deeply flawed man with aspirations, goals, and dreams? Nope, not even close. The extent that Peony's lineage had on the game was near non-existent. In fact, the only way the player knows for sure that Peony is Rose's brother, outside of an optional cutscene with Oleana, is because it's included on the back of his rare league card after you collect all of the story-based legendaries. Yeah, it's as disappointing as it sounds. Other than that, it's completely irrelevant and doesn't contribute to anything, which makes you wonder what was the point of making him Rose's brother at all. Peony doesn't seem fazed in the slightest that his brother almost managed to destroy the entire region and lost his privilege of freedom as a result. The only continued development for Rose is that Oleana can be seen on the island looking for him, despite Rose supposedly being behind bars after giving himself up to authorities. Oleana admits that Rose can't be on the island, but essentially has nothing better to do. She mistakes Peony, Rose's brother, for Rose due to their similar appearance, and that's it. The 2 new characters introduced, Peony and Nia, are incredibly shallow and one-dimensional, despite the overwhelming abundance of untapped potential. Peony is a fun character in the sense that he's very energetic and expressive, but that's all he is. He's just the goofy, submissive dad from beginning to end. Nia is just the rebellious daughter from beginning to end. The father-daughter dynamic is such an easy trope to flesh out and incorporate character development into the story, but it was completely ignored. The lore left a lot to be desired. There are some tiny pieces of text that dive a bit deeper into Calyrex outside of his role as the King of Bountiful Harvest, but nothing too substantial or overly interesting. There's an additional side quest that revolves around the Musketeer trio from Gen 5, consisting of Terrakion, Virizion, and Cobalion. Sonia has you go out to collect hundreds of their footprints, similar to the Alolan Digletts from the Isle of Armor, to track them down in order to catch them. Secret Pokemon make a welcome return such as Keldeo and Spiritomb. Keldeo actually requires the use of the optional camp side mechanic that is largely inconsequential otherwise, which is a cool way to incorporate that feature. Crown Tundra also offers new Pokemon cosmetics, returning old Pokemon, and some new useful items like the ability patch, which unlocks any Pokemon's hidden ability. Another feature that I personally was looking forward to was the Galarian Star Tournament. This was a mode that reintroduced multi-battles after it was conveniently and inconspicuously removed from the battle tower. I wonder why. Star Tournament allows you to join up with gym leaders and other important characters met throughout your journey, the main gimmick being the character interactions which, I will admit, are pretty awesome. The unfortunate downsides being that there are no set levels, so you can bring in level 100s which invalidates everyone, and the player is also able to bring in a full team of 6 for some reason, while everyone else is locked to 3, further solidifying the invalidation of these so-called stars. This means that to fully appreciate the Galarian Star Tournament, you need to go out of your way to artificially inflate difficulty by handicapping yourself, despite that being the job of the developer to engineer rule sets that the player must abide by, just like what they did for the Pokemon World Tournament back in Generation 5. An odd and unfortunate choice, but a fun addition nonetheless. I wanted to briefly point out that the Crown Tundra circumvented the issue with the lack of level scaling in interesting ways. First, in the max layer they straight up prevent you from using your own Pokemon. Second, there are significantly less fights in the Crown Tundra compared to the Isle of Armor. I was initially hoping for more battles, but less in this case is more, if Game Freak insists on not introducing level scaling. Challenges derived from battling and successfully catching all of the legendaries spread across the tundra. Having obscenely strong level 100s can often work against you in this case, as the goal isn't to to beat everything to a pulp, but to make calculated plays necessary to bring the wild legends into a range to more easily orchestrate their capture. It would be remiss of me to not mention that the music is phenomenal, easily rivaling the base game with some incredible remixes to old tunes and some really sweet new ones. So, with all that being said begs the question, was the expansion pass worth it? I recently had the displeasure of playing through the Isle of Armor again, and it did not age very well at all. The Isle of Armor pales greatly in comparison to the Crown Tundra in basically every way. I would argue that the Isle of Armor is worth around $5 tops, which leaves a whopping $25 unaccounted for of the total $30 price tag. Is Crown Tundra worth around $25, which is just over a third of a commercial title? There is a decent amount of content packed in here, but it would largely depend on what you're looking to get out of it. If you really liked what Sword and Shield had to offer, then this is more or less the same as that, so you will enjoy yourself. If you're looking for a compelling narrative that expands on the Pokemon universe in new and exciting ways, then definitely not. The gameplay aspect of Crown Tundra is Sword and Shield at its best, but the story is a lot worse than base Sword and Shield, simply because there wasn't one. You go to a random island just cuz, you bump into an estranged family, you talk to a brain tumor deer, help it grow a carrot, and then capture it. And that's the extent of the overarching narrative for Crown Tundra. If you enjoy max raids, or Dynamax in general, then Max Lair is definitely a step up in the right direction, and there are plenty of legendaries to help sink several hours of gameplay into. And if you're a competitive player, then gaining easy access to the returning 100 old Pokemon, new useful items, as well as almost all of the new Pokemon minus a horse and Regi, then you will most likely be satisfied as well. I must mention I'm extremely disappointed that the verse recorder is still unaccounted for, and the 20-minute battle timer is still there to ruin your fun and enjoyment for no reason. The expansion pass overall, I believe, is a glimpse of what Sword and Shield intended to be from the beginning, and it's a sneak peek of what may be in store for the future of the franchise, with a controllable camera and wide, expansive areas to explore as you go on an adventure with your favorite Pokemon in order to catch some of them, while aiming to be the best trainer there ever was. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, as it helps a great deal, and consider subscribing if you would like to see more. We're extremely close to our goal of 100,000 by the end of 2020, so a huge thanks to all of you for getting us this far. I also want to give a shout out to my patrons and YouTube members. Thank you all for your continued support. You guys are awesome. Until next time.